Two things stand out for me. The first is I feel like the opportunities to improve, change the trajectory, build is just so much greater. I remember at some of those early jobs, bring up an idea and somebody would say, well, we tested that 7 years ago and it was a 0.8% increase. And maybe we test again. You remember going like, that's not, you're building, there's big blocks you can go and create. You can, build teams, you can find new avenues, you can fail, you can win. And that kind of like, it's almost a little adrenaline-y, and I hate to say that, but there's almost like that chance that you have those big breakthroughs and you're like, pumping your fist because you're so excited. There's just more of that. The second one would just be, I'm just not very good at, large bureaucratic organizations. Like I'm always happy to have a conversation and understand. I have a boss, but I always wanted to have a seat at the table where I could have the conversation. Like, why are we going left? Why aren't we going right? Well, we're going left for this reason. Okay, like you get on board, you do it, even if you're not always in. Bigger companies, my experience has been, it's just so hard. You're kind of working in your silo, and so many things can happen outside your silo that determine your success. To me, that's really hard.
There's a difference between a dream chaser and a dream catcher. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Dreamcatchers podcast. I'm your host, Jerome. And I tell you, week after week, I tell you, you're in for a treat. Without a shadow of a doubt, you're in for a treat this week. Go ahead and get your notebook out, get the pen ready. Yeah, I guess you could type it on your notes if you want on your phone, but I think handwriting is one of those becoming lost arts. And when you actually write it, for some reason, I think it sticks a little bit better. But anyway, we've got John in with us today. He is in Minnesota, and they just got hit by a snowstorm. Now, all the folks in that part of the country have been bragging about how mild the winter was and how great things have been. And today he's talking to me with that white stuff on the ground that I think so many people are trying to get rid of as spring comes on in. So, John, man, it's so good to be with you. Thank you to Matt Halloran for introducing us, because I know this one's going to be one for the record books.
I was not familiar with your podcast until Matt introduced it to me a little bit ago, and I've been hooked ever since. So it's been a lot of fun to listen to him, and I'm really excited to chat today.
So, I like to start these shows with the simple question. So you had an exit.
I did. Mine might be a little different than some of your other podcasts because mine was through a private equity firm. So I worked for one of the leading wealth managers or registered investment advisors in the country, and was there for 13 years and absolutely loved it. Just had a great time. And in that time, I actually had 3 different private equity transactions, meaning we went from private equity A to private equity B, and then private equity B to private equity C. And when we were going to go to private equity D, I was like, I've loved my 13 years. You guys have been awesome, but I need a break, and I gotta get out of being an operator for this long and switch to an advisor. So yeah, it was a really hard choice. It was a little over 2 years ago, but it's one I have not regretted since.
Wow. So for the people out there, because there's some people who know what private equity is. Some of them always like lump it all in as venture capital, and then some are just building their business. So were you at the private equity firm and then got dropped in to the company that got acquired? Were you at the company and got acquired by private? Give me the rundown.
Yeah, I grew up in marketing, worked in marketing for years, ran a large agency here out of Minneapolis. And in that agency, ended up working with a lot of wealth managers and just got really skilled and experienced at that marketing. And then was recruited by a wealth manager named Wealth Enhancement Group here in Minneapolis. And they were owned at the time by a private equity firm. And so I was recruited into a firm that was already held by a private equity firm. And so funny story, when I interviewed with them, I interviewed with the firm. I was like, my God, I think I can really help. Like, I think I'm a really good fit. You guys should hire me. I interviewed with the private equity firm, and sometimes good or bad. I thought I nailed it, Jerome. I'm like, that's done. I'm hired. Got to the end of the interview, and I said, I was feeling pretty good. I'm like, so are we a fit? And the guy goes, nope, you're not a fit. And I was like, oh shoot, I was so sad. And I actually went to the whiteboard. I don't remember what I drew, but I drew something on the whiteboard that said why I was a good fit. Went home to my wife. I'm like, I thought I had it. Like, I thought it was a really good fit. Well, it turned out he had the wrong job description. He was interviewing me for the CFO, and I'm a marketer. I was interviewing for the CMO. He called me the next day. He's like, I'm so sorry. You're totally hired. And I didn't get the job. But it was a very funny start to work in private equity.
So you're talking about all your marketing experience. And he's like, does this guy know anything about
Right.
financials?
Yeah, it was the wrong. It's so embarrassing. I don't know how it happened, but it really happened. I had 24 hours was like, oh, I thought I was the perfect fit for this firm. I totally know what they want to do. And it turned out, luckily, I was able to go there. And so, yeah, I've worked for for this firm that was held by 3 different private equity firms. And today I actually consult for a private equity firm because of learning so much about that experience.
Now, this part's really cool because I think so few people, once something's in private equity, get meaningful ownership. And so, how did you kind of finagle from, hey, I want to be an employee to, I have meaningful equity in this thing, and when we exit, I get rewarded handsomely for it.
Well, part of it's luck, luck and good timing. So when I joined, I was part of the management team of 3. So there was 3 of us that were immediate, and they had different opportunities through those different transactions where you could write a check and buy in. So at some points you're granted, options or units. And then at every transaction, many times you can then turn those into ownership rights or other areas. So over those 13 years, having those 3 transactions, I had different points to stay involved from an owner perspective and to grow that percentage over those years. And I was obviously a big believer in the firm. And so that really helped me be able to ramp that up over the years and continue to be at, the other part was the firm grew like crazy. When I joined, we were 2 billion in assets. And when I left, we were 53
Whoa.
billion and, one of the top 5 wealth managers. So, certainly I was part of that growth, but, great team, wonderful leadership, so you're also at the right time at the right place, right? I was at a point where that firm grew by 25x. And so, you're able to lean into that and be on a ride. The firm has continued to grow. They're 72 billion now. But, to be on a ride like that is, there's a little bit of right time, right place as well. And as hard as I work to be part of that, you can't discount all the other people that did the same and just being in the right time at the right place.
Yeah, but I mean, you're running marketing.
Yeah.
It's kind of important for growth. Um, so you say you went 3 companies. So you came in, the company owned private equity company owned it. You guys sold to another private equity company and then sold to another one and just kind of
Correct.
kept growing. And you said there were 3 executive leaders. I think that's the term you used. And so
Yep.
did the same 3 continue, or did you kind of get demoted at each time that you moved to a new equity company?
Luckily, I was able to stay as part of that team. That team did grow, as we changed dramatically from a $2 billion in assets under management to 53 billion. So originally it was myself. There was a COO and a CEO. So we really had 3 of us, and I was a CMO. Very much a marketing led company. Happy to be part of that team. Right, marketers aren't always on the management team. Super fortunate to be there. We added a very high CFO. We added a chief investment officer, a chief technology officer. So that team grew, but I was lucky to be part of that team, the entire time that I was there.
So something had to be working to go from 2 to 20 or 52. So, all right, break this down because you didn't just drop into the planet as a chief marketing officer. Did you have a role in corporate at some point, or were you an entrepreneur? Like, how'd you get on this trajectory?
Much more entrepreneur. So if you go back in my career, I came out of college as a marketer, and on the number side of marketing, if that makes sense, kind of, ROI, customer acquisition, just always, I have an analytics side. And I worked at some medium-sized companies for about 4 years. And in that time, I saw like, wow, these companies, they're nice, but it's kind of boring. And I applied for a promotion and they said, we can't give it to you. You're too young. We're actually gonna give you the money, but we're not going to give you the title or the responsibility, but we want you to stay. And I remember thinking, well, I think I'm working hard and I'm super motivated. And that kind of bummed me out. So I got the entrepreneurial bug about 4 or 5 years in. And that's when I referenced an agency relation or role before working with management. And I did that for 10 years. And that was entrepreneurial, started with 20 people, ended with 150, but similar growth where it was like a bunch of people in a room just figuring it out. And was, lucky to be again in another role that grew like crazy and learned a lot. And a lot of that foundational learning is what has helped me, right? Like I've made every mistake. Like, like you're motivating people wrong, you're learning wrong, you're learning what not to do, and just going through those roles. So in these roles, I've never really been in a corporate role, meaning like, I was at a company that grew from 20 people to 150. And then I went to Wealth Enhancement Group, the wealth manager, joined when there were a couple hundred people, left when there were 1,000. So I don't know if you consider that corporate or not. I still consider that kind of mid-size,
Yeah.
entrepreneurial growth companies. One of the things I learned, Jerome, though, was they get over 1,000 people. It's not for me. Like part of that, part of the reasons I left 2 years ago was I love the ride, tired, happy, we were winning. But I'm also like, this company's growing into something that I'm not sure I'm the right person or it's what I wake up to do. And so a lot of the work I've done since there in advisory and on boards and working with private equity is in companies that have kind of taken their back in that, 50 people, 100 people trying to get on that same growth trajectory. And that really was to learn. Now it's ironic because I love to grow companies. So I almost, when I've been in the right place and been able to grow them, I almost grow them out of something I like. And then all of a sudden one day I wake up and go, wow, this is big and bureaucratic and I'm not sure I'm good at this. And it's time to jump back down the ladder.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different operator. So let's go there because we actually haven't had that conversation on this show. What do you like about the smaller kind of bootstrapping rocket ship type growth versus, the big lug elephant whales, the
Yeah.
battleships that take forever to turn around?
Two things stand out for me. The first is I feel like the opportunities to improve, change the trajectory, build is just so much greater. I remember at some of those early jobs, bring up an idea and somebody would say, well, we tested that 7 years ago and it was a 0.8% increase. And maybe we test again. You remember going like, that's not very exciting. Like I don't wake up to increase at 0.8, like like marginally.
Not transformational by any stretch of the
No.
imagination.
And in these smaller companies, it's that kind of you're building, there's big blocks you can go and create. You can, build teams, you can find new avenues, you can fail, you can win. And that kind of like it's almost a little adrenaline-y. And I hate to say that, but there's almost like that chance that you have those big breakthroughs and you're like, pumping your fist because you're so excited. There's just more of that. So that would be the first one. The second one would just be, I'm just not very good at large bureaucratic organizations, right? Like I'm always happy to have a conversation and understand. And being a CMO, I was, I have a boss who's the CEO and I'm very respectful of that in the chain of command. But I always wanted to have a seat at the table where I could have the conversation. Like, why are we going left? I don't understand. Why aren't we going right? Well, we're going left for this reason. Okay, like you get on board, you do it, even if you're not always in. Bigger companies, my experience has been, it's just so hard. You're kind of working in your silo. And so many things can happen outside your silo that determine your success. To me, that's really hard. And again, many people, are wonderful at that and thrive on that. I just know it's not for me. It's just that entrepreneurial bug is maybe a little too strong to be in 1,000+ person companies.
So it's your ability to influence and impact and not being beholden to other people's decisions or choices when you've got a clear goal or mark you're chasing or pursuing.
I think that's well said. I think that's really well said.
I watch so many people move from being an employee to the entrepreneurial role. And, you know, for a lot of people, they enjoy the fact that they don't have to make all the decisions. And it's not on them, and the buck doesn't stop with them, and there's somebody else they can blame. But for true entrepreneurs, having somebody else to blame doesn't really do any good because the blame is they wouldn't get out my way so I could do what I needed to do in order to get it done.
I totally. And when I was at one of those earlier firms I referenced before, where I figured it was not entrepreneurial enough, I remember I did everything I had to do with my work. I was totally caught up. They were really happy with me. I researched everything I could on the internet. My fantasy football team was perfect. My finances were in order. I was bored. I remember thinking like, I'm going to jump out the window. Like these days are long when I don't have anything to do. Like when I'm not challenged and there's not something going on, it's like, this is a long day. Like it's 2 o'clock and you're like, okay, well, probably the earliest I can leave is 4:30, but I don't really have anything to do. Maybe I'll go for a walk around the office. Like I just remember those days and like, I'm just not wired that way. That just didn't work for me.
multiple trips to the water cooler is what came to mind for
Right.
me. It's like I remember being bored on some days and going and popping popcorn, right?
Right.
So that people would come talk to me because whenever they smelled the popcorn, they wanted some, so they would come talk.
I love it, man. But you've been on the flip side, right? As you're doing your own business now too. It's like, then you're on the other side, and you're like, boy, would that be nice. Like there are days, like I have to admit, like we're tired and we're like, I've got 97 things on my to-do list and they're all important. And, having time to go pop that popcorn would be awful nice. So it's, I caution people, the grass isn't always greener. There's plenty of days where you're like, I do choose this path, but I like a breather as much as the next person or a good vacation.
Yeah. And so one of the things that you've mentioned and you just kind of dropped it and kept on moving, which I think is always impressive when I have such elite guests on the podcast, is you said, I help out on a couple of boards. I was like, he said boards and nobody talks about being on boards. We label boards governance as X5 for founders, and we encourage founders to actually have a board so that they can become chairman of the board and kind of exit the day-to-day of the operation of the business before they make their exit, because we know that when people make their exit without having that separation, that is kind of like hitting a brick wall in a head-on accident. And so because they go from going full speed to full stop and they didn't have any way to decouple, slow down, there were no brakes. So let's talk about boards and like your interest in boards and what you see that makes companies better. And maybe because you have the PE experience, you'll just expect boards to always be there. But I see a lot of founders that don't do the board step, and I think they're missing a serious opportunity.
Well, boards, it's another role, right? So it's a different part of it is, and I've had to learn and make sure I'm being a great board member because I've been an operator, right? I've been the one to those stories we were just talking about, like roll up the sleeves and get it done. There's a problem, there's an opportunity, you make it happen. It's not your job on a board, right? Your job on a board is to be an advisor, is to give feedback, to hold accountable when needed, right? To help firms grow. And for me, it scratched the itch that I described where I love these growing firms. I love the idea of like, we have an idea and we got to figure it out. And so I have been able to find a number of them through industry connections and through kind of my specialty, which is financial services marketing. Luckily, there aren't a ton of financial services marketers actually, so it is a relatively in-demand skill set. Also working for private equity for years, I've learned a lot about how to grow firms, how to structure firms, right? Not just the marketing side, but how to operate a good firm, how to act like the firm you're going to become. And so a lot of that has transitioned as well, where it's not just about growing, it's about structuring and building and hiring teams. And for me, I also do some investing and both direct investments and through venture capital firms. And so between all of those, I feel like I get to see a lot of interesting businesses, right? Some that I look at myself, some through venture capital, some through my relationships in the industry. And I've been fortunate to find companies where there was a fit and a need where I thought I could support and really believed in the mission of the company. And so I am capped out, meaning I set a limit of 5 and I'm at 5. So I'm like, okay, that's where I need to be for these days to make sure I can give them attention and be available and do that. One's on the nonprofit side and 4 on the for-profit side, but that's been a good number for me in addition to some of the other consulting I do to keep me kind of plugged in. The other thing I would say, Jerome, is, when I exited, I didn't want to retire. Like this wasn't, and I got a lot of energy. I'm not, I just turned 50. I got a lot of gas in the tank. So it's like, I wasn't anywhere near retiring. It was, hey, I wonder if I can do this differently. I wonder if I can do this on my own. I wonder if I can do this as an advisor versus an operator. And it's been a great, 2 years and 3 months in, I can tell you it's been just the best. And I have no plans to change that path and to jump back into the operating role.
So let's talk about the board. What do you see as the biggest difference between a CEO that's running their company boardless versus some of the folks that you've been able to see as a board member? And I guess really what I'm interested in or curious about is how the day-to-day interactions goes for that CEO.
Well, there's two different, there's many different kinds of boards, but there's 2 specifically that I've worked in. One is where the board, or let's call it the representing party, is owns the majority of the firm. And in other words, they're the boss. The CEO reports to the board. That's a different, right? That's a structure where there are different conversations where occasionally the board will say, obviously you don't want to fight with your CEO all the day, or that's not a good relationship, but like you might have to say, we need to do these things. And there's a little bit more directive input. And, again, a board's job is not to operate, but at the same time, certain times a board will say, I think we really need to go left, or I think we really need to get to profitability, or I think we really need to focus on this area. And that's always a conversation. Other boards where you're asked to be on the board, or, given some compensation on the board, you're not their boss. You're not part of a structure where you're the boss. You are there to provide valuable input. And certainly that can at times mean disagreeing with the CEO, but it's a little bit more like, where do you need me to help and how can I do it? And so that structure with that conversation with the CEO is a little bit more collaborative, where it's, hey, what do you need? Hey, and it's always should be that way, right? They're both consultative roles, but a little bit more, where can I be of help? And I will say, board, when I think of a board, I don't think just showing up to board meetings. Like, that's not like, if that's your role as a board, number one, I don't think the board is being leveraged as it should. Number two, it's probably pretty cool if you're a board member because you don't really have to do anything. But to me, it's the board, and then it's all the strategic work and working on that strategic plan and being on call for that.
So which one do you think works better for somebody who wants to exit?
I hate to give you an answer, but I'm going to say it depends. I am honestly going to say it depends, because what I will say is, as someone who came out of my wealth management experience, being with the 3 different private equity firms, we had great relationships with all 3. And, I know sometimes people think private equity and they think gross, and sometimes other people think private equity and they think cool, or just a bank, or, you know what I mean? And so I was very fortunate to be in 3 different relationships. Those private equity firms helped us grow, helped us keep our culture, helped us become a better firm, helped us run more professionally. And so the growth that I was a part of was a lot driven by those private equity firms. Let me give you an example. I'm going to go on the way back machine a little bit. 2009, it's the middle of the recession, okay? It's bad. And I'm working at a wealth management firm. I'm like, what did I do coming here? This is maybe the worst career choice of all time, right? Like, are we even going to have an industry tomorrow? It's the Great Recession. It's bad. Through work with a private equity firm, they came to us and said, all right, yeah, it's bad. It's real bad. But we're going to solidify you guys. No layoffs for the next 2 years. No one's getting fired. Because what really matters right now are 2 things. One is taking care of clients. Like, if you're freaked out every day, all of the advisors that worked on the firm, how are you going to go do great things for your client? So they came in and they culturally understood. And they actually said, we're not going to cut the marketing budget. We're going to grow because everyone's pulling back. This thing's going to end. We're going to go. I mean, what was that worth? Like that, we didn't know what to do, and we were a good firm. That private equity firm created a scenario we doubled in the next 2 years. And it was because of that, right? It was because of that great input, leadership, support. Like, you guys are safe. We believe in you. We're going to ride it out. You got at least 2 years. Let's go. Like, what is that? Like, that changed the whole trajectory of a firm. So those are things, those stories that you don't always hear about private equity are like, oh, okay, like, that's awesome. Like, and firms who didn't have that love hearing the story, because they're like, yeah, we didn't do that. And we're like, yeah, we did.
We did, and we took your market share because you pulled back.
Mm-hmm. So back to your question, though, that's where it can depend. Private equity, like sometimes I think of, a boss or a funding, or like, there's good ones, there's bad ones, right? So, but I would say being with a good one is a game changer, right? Someone that is a growth equity that's all about, helping you grow. I mean, I know sometimes, again, private equity doesn't always get the love because not all are good actors, but if you get with the right one or the right group of them, it's phenomenal.
Wow. It's funny. I don't know if it's funny, but they do have a reputation more often than not. It's always interesting to hear the guys, oh man, they ruined my company, and maybe I should just buy it back and bring it back to its former glory. Like, very rarely do I hear people be extremely complimentary in the way that you are about the companies that you work with. What, outside of maybe the foresight to grow in a recession and making everybody feel safe instead of freaked out about the recession, was there anything that really just set them apart? Because guys trade war stories all the time, right? My experience is this and da 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 da. Was there anything where you're like, oh man, well these guys or gals or whoever are so much different because of?
I do. One is, private equity has a hold period, and that hold period it can be 2 to 12 years, depending on the structure and how it goes, right? But there is some time limit, right? They're investing out of a fund. That fund will run so long, that fund will eventually close, and they need to exit the investment. To me, the ones that separated have a track record of building firms, not just for that period, but for the long haul. And you can do it by talking to other firms that have had investments with them. You can ask them, give me your best and give me an investment that didn't work. Like, you really need to understand those private equity firms to see what kind of operators there are. The second thing I'll add, and again, remember, I'm a marketing growth person, so that's like in my DNA. PE firms that have to use a lot of leverage or a lot of debt to oversee a company can often take a lot of the money out of the company. And sometimes a firm needs to be in that, and that can work. I'm a fan of private equity firms that put money into the company. Like, let's grow this thing. What do you need? How are we going to figure this out together, right? Like, let's agree on a strategy, and then here's some tools to help you go execute it. So I think that's where it's really tricky. And one other great story is the firm I was working with was for sale, was in a process. And one firm was being very aggressive. And the CEO came to us and said, hey guys, I don't think we want to work for that firm. Based on their track record, based on what they've done, I don't think, and how we want to grow and what our vision is for the company. And it's not aligned to that firm. Not that that's a bad firm, just not aligned. And so in the process, we politely said, if that firm ends up buying our firm, we will all like to transition out over time. And in effect said, they're not going to buy us, right? Because we had a unified management team that said, you guys operate like this, we operate like this. It's not going to work. Now, could we have still been sold to them? In theory, but are they really going to buy us if we're all going to leave, like the whole team? So it didn't happen. It was great. And that was the good leadership to say, it's just not a fit. It's like, that's not the kind of firm. And again, the other thing I will say is private equity firms generally are not operators, right? They are not there to run the business. And if they are, something's real wrong, right? Like, that's where you get the bad story, right? Like, that's not good. They're there to provide guidance, capital, strategic input, resources, all those things, not operate.
And so you basically had a good example for your transition. So let's get micro. So did you get a wire or a check on the exit?
Wire.
The wire hits.
Yeah.
I suspect that it's more money in your account than you ever had at one time.
It was a good thing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I'd been through actually 3 of them, so don't forget there was 3 different. But yes, I mean, when you have an exit, that's a day where you're like, whoa, like, that's a nice, my net worth was X and now it's X plus 2, and it's hard not to be pretty giddy about that.
And so how long did that part last, the giddy part?
Not as long as I would think, meaning, it was bittersweet because I knew I was leaving on the last one, right? So there was this this transition, and it came through, but at the same time, I was walking away. I was, choosing to get off the bus, and the bus is doing great. It's still going, and it's like, I'm getting off. And there's something really hard about that. I'd actually journaled a lot the year before, because that's a big decision. You're walking away, and you're like, yeah, I'm walking away. It's time. And that journal really helped me. I would go back and look at it. I would go, there's those days where I've had very minimal regret. So I've been lucky that in that decision, I'm 2 years and 3 months later, still very confident in it. But at the same time, yeah, you go back, there's days you're like, oh, why did I leave? That was dumb. I could have, I should have stayed one more round or one more turn or one more. And I go back and I read that journal, and that really helps. That really helps. And that kind of gets back to the bittersweet of, yes, wonderful outcome to have a transaction like that, and then at the same time, like, well, it was my time to do other work and to do it different ways.
I think some people romanticize it and make it better than it was. I think the work and the grind and the hustle and the bustle and the struggle and the frustrations and arguments and the negotiating and some of the things that a lot of people don't like. And you're like, oh man, I miss it. And then because you time capsuled it, right? You caught that stuff in real time. You can see how you actually felt, and you can actually go back to that day. It's almost like having pictures of what's going on to remind you of those days. And it's not every day. And most days were probably better than the days that weren't so great. But there are those days where you're like, man, I wouldn't trade what I got now for those days because they're a part of the mix. So go ahead. Yeah, I know you want to say something.
No, it's just, yeah, there's a sense of relief. Like, you're building this thing, you're part of it, it's your baby, all those bad analogies, and you're like, there's some validation in that like,
Hey guys, as you might know, a very small percentage of the people who actually listen to this podcast are subscribers. So do us a favor, subscribe. In fact, we did some analytics and we found out that only 25% of the people who listen are subscribers. And our goal is to get that to about 75% over the next 3 months. So do us a favor, hit the subscribe button so you get notified when our new episodes come. We plan to bring immense value to you guys going forward as we continue to improve the content that we create at Dreamcatchers. Your dreams should be real.
we built something meaningful and we built it to a scale that other people valued it. And so, yeah, there's pride in that, right? Like, and when you're selling your business, you're talking to a lot of people and they're giving you validation, like you've built a great business. And hopefully they're not just saying that to, trick you, but like, so there is that thing of like, and then it's kind of like you're breaking up, like, oh, then it's gone. So there's a relief component, there's a celebratory component. And then for me, there's kind of I'm always going to remember this day, but this day is over.
So at any point, did you feel lost? Did you feel sad? Did you wonder what was next? Or did you figure that out before you walked out the door?
I was really lucky with this. And I won't say that, those things never cross. I was able to consult back to the company for a number of years. So after I left, I was still had some involvement. So it wasn't like like everything's gone and it's dead. I was still able to talk to the team and have some awareness. So there was it was more of a slow ending than like you're gone, you'll never see it again and how it goes. So I was very lucky with that. But I am somebody who likes to have a home, if that makes sense. And that's one thing I thought a lot about. Like, I'm going to leave and I have these different areas I'm working on between boards and consulting and investing, but I kind of like having a home. Like, you know what I mean? Somebody, it's lonely out there. It's a big world. And I like working with people. I'm a people person. So I've been lucky to have a couple really good relationships through all of that time where I still kind of feel like I have a home, even if it's not where I used to work. Through these other relationships and these other things, I kind of have that stability of relationship. And, as much as I do split my time, I'm not really a lone wolf, if that makes sense, where you come in and you get the work done and then you're just gone. Like, I don't know. I'm not wired that way. I really appreciate those long-term relationships that are built.
Yeah, I think that was one of the biggest struggles when I left and started doing the real estate stuff full time. And it was like, man, I'm a lone wolf out here. Nobody wants to talk to me unless we're talking about a deal that they're a part of. And if they're not a part of a deal, they could care less how the deal is going. So these struggles are mine and mine alone. But what I realized in hindsight was being willing to be lone wolf allows you to go climb mountains that other people might not want to climb. And so there's some freedom with that, but I agree with you 1,000%. It can get super lonely. One of the things that we've noticed when we talk to groups of founders who have exited is that like 60% of their relationships go away when they walk away from their business. And so when we talk about the 5 people they spend the most time with, usually 3 of them are wrapped up in their business in some way, shape, or form. And so what's cool about what you described is, hey, I walked away, but I was still tied in some way, shape, or form. It wasn't like sell it and then some people call it or entrepreneur purgatory, where it's like, hey, I sold the thing. Now I don't have any control. I don't really have any influence or say, but I'm stuck doing the things. And basically I'm a button pusher versus a decision maker. It sounds like you were like in a consultant role and had you on targeted things that needed to move. And based on your track record, that probably kept that door open because they trusted you more than other folks. Is that fair?
It's fair. And it's the benefit of, I've been very lucky to work with some great people who had great trust, right? And established that over years and years. So, a lot of times leaving isn't always pretty, right? Like it's like, hey, I'm leaving. What, you're leaving? Like I thought we were in this forever. And so, I had some worked with leadership that was, I had developed a lot of trust with, and thus they kind of gave me an exit ramp that was one that allowed me to kind of gracefully leave, but still, be helpful on my way out. And I'll always appreciate that. Like that, I was being treated very well. Even though you've decided to step off the merry-go-round is I don't know if it happens every time, but I know many times it doesn't. And so I was very fortunate with that.
No, I mean, a lot of people will cut off your access and then tell you you're being escorted by security out of this place because they don't want you to do damage because you're leaving, or you might take something with you that they don't want to lose.
And it was
Scarcity
nice,
mindset.
I didn't leave to go to another firm. I left because it was time to leave. There's a difference there, right? And I think understanding that emotionally allowed me to communicate in a way in which, here's why. And I actually gave notice 9 months before I left. Like it was like, hey, I always told you I'm not gonna like just walk out, but I think the time's coming. And the businesses in this place, these transactions are happening. I think it's going to be my time. And so it was great because able to develop a plan and talk about it, recruit a successor, be able to do a really functional handoff. Because again, I didn't leave because I was mad. I didn't leave because somebody did anything wrong to me or I didn't like the strategy or whatever. I just left because like this company's getting big and I'm tired and I've been doing this for 13 years and I think it's time to hand this off, and I'd rather do it now. So it was, again, it takes two to have a good relationship, and I was very fortunate to have those people with me.
Now, were you already investing? Because oftentimes after the exit seven is the post-exit portfolio. And
Yeah.
so people get a chunk of money and then they're trying to figure out how to be a resource allocator, even though they've been an operator for however long. And now it's like, ooh, which company do I pick? And let me go invest in something that I don't know anything about, but it sounds really cool. And like they end up losing their money. So since you were working with PE companies, were you already exposed to investing on your own? Like, let's talk about that
I
a little
was,
bit.
yeah, I was, to a modest amount. But to be honest, I didn't have time, right? It was the time effort to like, whether it's to be on a board or to fully evaluate an investment or to find an investment or to, work with, different players. So part of it was through that 9 months, it was great because I had a long runway to figure that out. So I was able to hit the ground running the day I was no longer with the firm. I already had 2 or 3 things. I was able to communicate to people, hey, here's what I'm planning on doing. Do you know anyone I should talk to or how I could be helpful? And so I was very fortunate to have that kind of rolling start into that. That said, it ramped up significantly once I was gone and had, many more hours a week to be focused on finding investments, finding the right boards, finding the people to network with and to learn those things. So it was a rolling start, but it still ramped up once I was gone.
Yeah, man. I think this is probably the epitome of an ideal or a dream exit because I watch so many people jump out the plane and then try to build a parachute while they're falling, and that doesn't work. And they're burning through capital, right? Because
Yep.
they don't know they haven't figured it out. And then even the emotional stuff, the six centers of doubt that we talk about all the time. So self-image, like for you, I'm a marketer. I grow companies, and all I can do is grow the companies that I work for. It's like, well, maybe I could take those skills to a bunch of other places, and maybe I can make a direct capital investment here and help you scale because I've done it for companies of your size before and get rewarded in a different way than I have. And oh, by the way, give back and help younger folks they might not be younger, but maybe younger in experience, get the same results that I've got over the past decade. Um, the work piece, I think you figured that out. You're still doing a lot of similar tasks. You're not the operator, but it's an advisory role, and you're seeing, and because you actually operated, being an advisor is, I will say, easier. You know what the outcome is, and you know what the situation is, you know what questions to ask, but the actual button pushing, that part is very time consuming, and it can be very stressful, but you can stay out of the stress and still give the guidance. Now, I mean, I'm looking at you, John. You said you just turned 50. You look like you're in great shape, man. Did you not give up your health to grow the companies and grow the wealth? Like, how did you figure that part out? Because that's one of the other things that people struggle with.
I must have a lot of filters on, or maybe our daughter was using it and turned some filter on. It's awfully kind of you to say. No, I mean, it was, that's always a struggle when you're in that role. And, I'll say, you kind of have this dream life. Okay, I'm going to leave, the 70, 80 hour and lots of travel. And that was the role. And it was great. And I loved it. But like, I'm going to leave it and I'm going to have all this time to work out. And I'm going to have all this time to, well, it's not quite that easy. Like, and I've done, I am able to still go to the gym more and more and do those things. But it's like, at the same time, it's like, there were days where it's like, wow, I got a little bit more free time and I'm on my phone too much, or I'm, I'm just being honest. Like, I wish I could tell you every day was a model of efficiency and I, do pretty well to keep a very tight schedule. But there's days you're like, that probably wasn't my best day. Like, that probably wasn't the most effective day. So I have been able to maintain more balance. One of the reasons I just left was, personally with some stuff, with health with my parents and, kids in high school. It was like, I just had a couple of years. It was like, I'd like to be really flexible with my time. I'd really like to be able to set my own schedule. And that's just not as possible in a fast growing, thriving, when you need to be in Boston, you need to be in Boston. And you can't really say, I'm not going to Boston tomorrow. I mean, obviously if it's an emergency, you don't have to go, but like, and in this role, I'm able to much more set my own schedule. And whether that means taking the dog for a walk or attending our kids' sporting events or more time with family, that's where I will say I feel incredibly lucky that I can kind of set those times and figure that out.
Is it luck? I mean, this is by design, man. I mean, you picked, right? You decided and you executed a plan. Is it really luck that you
Well, definitely planful. But that said, I mean, if the firm I was with didn't grow 25x because of me. Now, was I a part of a cog in that wheel of many people that did? Absolutely, right? Like, I'm very proud of the part I drove in that. But I mean, it was a small part, let's be honest. And I think I had a lot of influence on that business and we were driven by organic growth and I was supported in that. But I mean, great CEO, great private equity partners, great. The market for wealth managers has exploded the last 15 years where I was in the space. Like, I mean, a lot of things did go right. Now, again, I'm not discounting how hard I busted my, to get there. But come on, I could have done that in a lot of firms and been, at square one. So I do think luck is a big part of it. Now, I've been planful on top of that, but it's a mix, right? It's a mix. And, the plan, I'll also say, just the plan sounds clear now. It wasn't always clear. There were many days where I'm like, right, like I remember saying, I either have the smartest or the dumbest plan of all time, what I'm doing now, right? Consulting for these different boards and doing these things. I'm like, is this smart or do I have like 9 jobs? And it would have been way easier just to have one that I did. Like, so, I mean, there's plenty of days where it's like that strategy, it sounds refined looking back, but it was a progression to get there for sure.
Now, you told me that you listened to Rick's episode, and I'm not sure how deep you got into it, but he talked about going into a pure void. He talked about his succession planning and how he kind of ramped it down, and how when they walked out, there was still this emptiness, there was still this loss. Now, he was in his business for longer than you were in your business, but on the backside of this thing, and we see it for anybody who's been in it for over 10 years, there's this, it's like, we call it the founder's exit paradox. And most people don't think they're ever going to experience it because they got more money than they ever had in their bank account. And they can figure out what trip to go on or what car to buy or what watch or whatever, right? But the hedonistic stuff fades pretty quick. And so you said there were some days and then you moved on. But if you would, because I don't want listeners to think it's all rainbow and unicorns, right? Like on the backside of the exit, there's some tough stuff. And so can we talk about that for just a couple of minutes? I don't want to put you in a dark space, but we got to let the listeners know that this thing is real.
Happy to talk about it. And what, a difference to Rick Edelman's credit, I was not the founder of the firm. I was a early member who helped grow it significantly. Rick founded that thing, right? That there's a different, and when I imagine how involved I felt like I was an owner, a founder, a driver, X to Y, and proud of what we accomplished and built. I joined a marketing staff of 5 and it was 50 when I left and did all these cool things, right? And grew from X to Y and, you're proud of that. Like, you're proud of that. When you think about Rick, and the compliments to Rick Ellerman, I mean, who built that firm and got called on the radio, and that great story you guys tell on the podcast, and when he goes back, and I forgot some of that, it was great to listen to it again. That was, I mean, his name was on the door. Let's not forget. I mean, and even in the merger later, Ellerman Financial Engines, right? I mean, even when they merged with one of the biggest RAs in the world, his name was on the door. So I probably a little bit easier than Rick, meaning I was an important, executive team member. It wasn't, Wernz Financial. My last name is Wernz, John Wernz. So it wasn't, John. Thankfully, that'd be a terrible name. Edelman is a much better name. But yeah, I mean, again, I would go back to those days. I've been very fortunate to have, you gave that example of what you teach, and having, 3 or 4 key relationships professionally that have transcended that time. Are people I still work with today, years later. And some of those, I've had a few other people move on from the firm I was with. We work together again now. It was like, I know what that person can do, and I have this opportunity over here. And so have been able to play matchmaker a time or two. But yeah, there's those 3 or 4 people where they're friends. I hate to call them colleagues. You don't want to, but they've become so much more than that. And I'm just happy to have that. I'll say also, there was a couple people I was dying to work with that I was then able to work with, right? Like, you kind of always say, like, if we ever get the chance, we should work together. I had the chance. And so, thankfully, some of those relationships became some of my closest work relationships, where it's, you're not just talking about, the P&L and the runway and all the good things. You're talking about the dog or the kids, or the fun stuff. So that has helped me on some of those days where you look back and you feel a little alone. I also left. This is an interesting story, Jerome. The firm I left, I actually left twice. So I left once. So sorry for the balloons. I think my daughter turns that on sometime. That was fun. And we had recruited a new CMO, and unfortunately, the new CMO wasn't the right fit, and I ended up going back. Now, I was consulting, right, as we talked about that time, but then there was a seat, and I didn't necessarily want to go back. That was not, but it was, hey, can you help us? I felt like I let them down a little. The transition plan didn't work. I was still consulting. I went back. Also, the day I left was the day COVID started. So I went from never home, it was March 1st, right, of 21, to never not home, right? I mean, like, in the craziest way. Now, luckily, we had a couple of crazy kids and a fun household. So I didn't, I was able to keep my wits about me. But yeah, I mean, I went from, running around the country doing cool things to, in my basement, in my office basement that I'm in here now. And not leaving it for months at a time. So yeah, it was a shock.
It's funny because succession planning for some people is a curse word, like exiting or retiring is a curse word. And then you go through and you do the thing and you find out how important it is and how it's vital for the continuance of business and the success of the business and the future growth of the business. But people put it off. It's kind of like, I don't want to do a will, or I don't want to make a trust. It's like,
exactly.
Your relationship with your business is going to end. And when your relationship with your business ends, you better have some plan in place so people know what to do.
And I found, one of my questions was, I have a flexible schedule, meaning I choose how many boards I'm on. I choose if I'm consulting or working for a private equity firm. Those are choices I get to make. And I was trying to figure out, okay, so 60, 70, 80 hours. Okay, that's a lot. I would like something less. Is it 30? I will say, when I was doing 20 hours a week, I wasn't particularly happy. Like, it was like, okay, I got to find another board. I got to find another firm to work with. I got to find 20 hours. And it was, all of a sudden I'm playing solitaire on my phone. And, I've worked out, I'm working from home. I got done with the day. It's 4:00. My kids are teenagers now. They might not, I can't bribe them to hang out with me every day. It's like, that's not enough for me. So finding the balance, right, of loading up the opportunities, the boards, the investments with, kind of that fixed stuff, it's been, there's tweaking. You're like, okay, and there's been times where it's like, that might be too much. Like, my wife will say, I thought we were going to stay flexible, or I thought we were going to, our daughter is in California playing softball, and you have to come home for a meeting. Like I thought we were doing this. So it's been, you're still pulling the levers, trying to get that balance right.
Yeah. And they'll always keep you honest, man.
She's awesome. Yep.
They will always keep you honest. So let's talk about your direct investments. Have any of your companies that you invested in sold? Have you exited any of your investments?
We've had one exit that's been good, and then we have another one. There's a few more that are getting close. So yeah, it has been good timing for those. Many of them transact, and then there's a period where, as an advisor, maybe they don't need you anymore, or maybe there's actually a chance to say, do I really want to re-up again? This was great. Thank you for this multi-year period, but do we want to do it again? So it's an interesting, when you hit those times, it's, the portfolio might turn over. They might say, that was awesome. Thank you, John. Here's your funds that have, you've made on this transaction, and, good luck. And, so there's still goodbyes out there, even when you're doing the private investing and board work. And then there's other ones where I got to be honest, where it's like, I actually joined a board of one and I resigned 3 months later. And it wasn't, there was no fight. There was no, awful scandalous. I didn't, steal toilet paper from the bathroom. It wasn't anything crazy. I just got in there 3 months. And I went, I'm culturally not the right person, and how I think I can help and how they see me helping are two different things. That firm's doing well, but I remember I just went to the CEO and I said, time's valuable, and I don't think I'm the best fit. And I just, I'm still friends with that company, and I talk to them quarterly and try and support them. And I was like, I shouldn't be on this board. Like, it is not. I get to choose how I use my time, and this isn't the right, it's just a fit thing, and it's just not the right fit. So at 3 months, I was like, I'm back off.
So I don't want to specifically talk about that company, but how did that change your evaluation of boards going forward or companies going forward, as far as you lending your talents to the board? Because I think this is something that'll help a lot of people out who want to get into that space.
I think it's relationship. It's relationship with the CEO. Back to your earlier things that we talked about, in terms of, how you can work with the different people. And some CEOs, as we all know, are still in the cowboy or the cowgirl phase of their leadership, right? They're still they don't have an operating model. It's, the wild, wild west. They're making things up as they go. And for me, I want to work with someone who is building towards structure. That doesn't mean it's perfect, right? Because to the point of, I don't like huge firms. I don't like bureaucracy, but sometimes when you're with these firms and then every time you meet with them, they're going a completely different direction. You're like, okay, I can't track. I can't be effective as a board member. I don't think you really want a board that's going to help you, choose a direction and then stick to it. You're kind of like a board that just says, hey, I got a question. Can you help me with this? Yeah, I can help you with that. Like, to me, that's not a fit for me. So it really is about relationship to CEO or founder of the firm, and having one, that you get to know them before jumping on the board. And in that way, you're like, okay, do we work the same way? And do we have the same vision of just how things are run? Not do you pick A or B, right? That's not, it's like, how do you get to the selection of picking A or B? And there's some ways to do that. I don't know, have you ever heard of the entrepreneurial operating system, or traction as a method? So I think it's phenomenal. I've actually never used it myself. I've been around its usage. But to me, it's just like, when I see a company implementing that, and there's many, like, you could have it off the shelf, you could use that, you have a structure you would learn from General Mills, whatever. But is there a structure? Like, is there some guiding foundation? To me, that's the firms that I really like. And I'm lucky, a number of the firms we work with happen to work with traction. Actually, I think the book it's one of these, or it's there, or I can't remember which one it is, but it's great. Like, okay. And so for me, I have found that that's how I can then be helpful, because I don't want to just be on call. I want to work on what is the 3-year strategy and how we're going to get there.
Well, when a company gets to a certain size, you have to. There's too many people for you to change and twist and turn every other week or every quarter, let alone. And then the initiatives get so big that it takes more time than a couple of weeks to get through them. And so that CEO probably at some point ends up limiting the company. Now, if you do it too early, you can choke it out because there's not enough flexibility. But there gets a point where you've got to retool, restructure, and then really put a plan in place and be able to communicate that plan across different levels of leadership, as well as, being able to think out into the future. So that's really interesting. And I think it's interesting because you said, look, man, I don't like 1,000+ employee companies, but you probably don't like 10 employee companies either because it's just not substantial enough. But there's that sweet spot for you where you're like, man, I can really do
Well,
work here.
I'm okay with the smaller ones if there's a structure or if it's a structural thinker, meaning there's a planful approach. And that doesn't mean that early or those early days you don't that plan changes, right? That's not what that means. One of the boards I'm on is I mean the company is under 5 people.
No
Um,
way.
yeah, but the founders just I mean it's amazing. The firm's name is Testimonial IQ. Andrew Johnson is the founder. He was actually a founder at a previous firm that I was on the board of. And I just like we just click like how he thinks and how he builds and what we do. And yeah, I mean it's they're growing quickly, but it's it's startup. Like it's they built a great product, they're rolling it out. It's but they're still figuring out what the world even looks like some days. And it's I love that one. It's just one I'm really happy to be a part of. So I think it's more the mindset than it is even the size. Like and just do they have an operational mindset, which is funny because I would say in my career I usually am not the most operational thinker, like but it's like you have to have a structure to then have innovative thinking, and to your point, not to stifle it, but it's like you've got to have some kind of planful approach even to then throw on, okay, we're going to try 3 crazy things on top of it.
I love it, man. John, I could talk to you all day. The energy is so great and just a vast experience. And so you've been able to do here, there, kind of weave through. Um, I usually wrap up these interviews with 2 questions. The first one, when you think about your network, because you've been able to actually pull people through the portal of exit, who else should be a guest on the show?
Well, I don't know. I was going to throw a good friend out there. And actually, it's the person who introduced me to who introduced me to you.
Ah,
So, Susan Thader, who is the chief marketing officer at a firm named FMG, is one of the best connectors I've ever seen in financial services, and is an award-winning, just super impressive person, and has switched from big company to entrepreneurial technology startup to all of those things. So has had a number of exits and moves similar to myself along the way to get to where she's at today. And she's just the best. I mean, Susan is just one of those people you meet or talk to, and you're just like, she leaves a mark.
wow. All right, Susan, we're going to get you on. We're going to send this one to you so you know that you've been called by John. All right. And then the final question, because we've covered so much ground. I love that we got to sit in between governance, exit 5, and play around in your post exit portfolio. So we got through 5, 6, and 7 today, which is pretty rare. A lot of people are still trying to figure it out post exit. So they stop at 6, and that's the big hurrah. But you've been able to get on board. You've been making direct investments. You've been spending more time with the family. Like you check all the boxes on what when people are trying to figure out what next looks like. And you say it openly. Like I have my days where I think about going back, but I don't regret the decision that I made. And then even like bringing the plane down and having a gradual descent instead of just jumping out and saying it's over, I'm out of here. Um, so the question I would like to ask you to wrap it up is what's the one thing you want the listeners to take away from the episode?
I think it's really finding your sweet spot. I mean, for me, it's taken a lot of time, meaning early in my career, I was with the wrong size firms. I was with these bigger firms. I was a small firm person. It's like that took me a while. Then I became into these growth. I was like, oh, I love growth firms. And that's been a huge part of my trajectory, even when I've at times been a part of growing myself out of the roles I like. And so then it's been changing and being open to change to get into the right seat in the right kind of firm. I think a lot of people work in the wrong kind of firm for big parts of their career, whether it's, what we talked about in the large companies where they're kind of in a, they don't ever feel like they really were a part of something, or they're in the small one where they're like, this stresses me out. I don't like it. Like, finding that right size firm and finding the right, those people to me was key. And, I've been fortunate to be in a couple of them. And, I look back and how much fun that was, right? I mean, man, those days were so fun. And, waking up and being like, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is the right firm. These are my people. And being there for, sometimes 10 years at a time, but then pulling the plug and trying to start it over again to recreate it.
Wow. That's so good. So it's like right fit is the difference between massive success. And I mean, as a marketer, I guess that would make sense, right? You got to find product market fit before you can go to
Yep.
scale.
Totally product market fit. And I mean, I would say success, but I'd say happiness. I mean, I'd say happiness, leads to success. Like if I'm happy, I'm working hard, I'm driving, it's like good things are happening. It's like, God, those are my most fun days, right? And then, realizing like this firm turned into something. The firm did nothing wrong. The firm is as good as ever. It just grew into something where it's like, great firm, just not my firm anymore. Time for somebody else to take that and run it forward. And so, God, that was hard, like, and people think you're nuts. Like you're leaving. What's wrong? Like, what's wrong with the firm? Nothing. What's wrong with you? I don't think anything's wrong with me. I mean, I'm as screwed up as the next person, but like, what are you doing? I'm like, it's
I
time.
got
It's
I got
time. And
different priorities,
I got you.
right?
And that's where the journal came in. I mean, that's where you go back to the journal because there's people are hitting you over the head. Like, what are you doing? I thought you guys are doing well. Yep. And I'm out and I'm happier because of it. And so, very, again, appreciative of having the opportunity to do that and make it work. But yeah, it's made me a more effective person in my career.
Wow. Well, John, you're the epitome of a dream catcher, man. Thank you so much for joining us on the episode. This is a game changer for anybody who listens because they get to see the backside, right? There's all the doom and gloom that a lot of people say, don't ever exit, don't ever retire. But there's so much more on the other side of it. And you're living proof that you can do it early, right? You did it in your 40s. You can do it early and enjoy life and then do things more on your terms, more and with the financial security, right, that you get from a liquidity event. And I just watch so many people struggle with it and they're like, I don't know what to do, or I don't know what I would do. Well, if you got transferable skills and transferable relationships, your exit can be extremely pleasant. And that's what you taught us today.
It's been, more good days than bad. And I'm very, again, I keep saying, appreciative or lucky or fortunate, but yeah, man, it's, what a great time. And yeah, a lot of what I do now is like, let's be really supportive of the people who have been so supportive of me. And let's make sure that we're part of that team.
All right, y'all. So that's the episode. To the listeners, your dreams should be real. We'll catch you on the next episode.